Welcome, everyone. My name is Courtney Collins. I'm the Assistant Director in the Environmental Law Center here at Vermont Law School. And today we are holding an information session on the environmental governance course that's taking place this summer in Term 4, which is at the very end of the summer. And this is a really wonderful course with a unique opportunity to have the option of taking a field study into Asia at the conclusion of the course. And so this information session today is to talk a little bit about the class, and then certainly some of the logistics and expectations for the trip portion of the class, which again is optional. But I would say the majority of the class will oftentimes then go on to take this trip, because it's just such an extraordinary opportunity to be able to travel. So today I would like to introduce, well, I introduced myself. We have with us as well Claire Andrews, is the program manager and maven of our Asia Partnership Program. And then, of course, we have the star of the show, Professor Bob Percival is here today. And Professor Percival has graced us in our summer program, teaching with us for many years now. And when he's not up here in the summertime, he is the director of the Environmental Law Program and a professor of law down at the University of Maryland School of Law. So that is where he is tuning in from today. And I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with us today. I appreciate that. So why don't I go ahead and turn that over to you, and you can tell us a little bit about the class and the trip. And for those of you who are listening right now, why don't you gather your questions and hold your questions until Professor Percival is done speaking, and then we can go through any questions. So
great. I really enjoy teaching this class. For many years, I've taught at Vermont during the summers, and unfortunately wasn't able to. I was interrupted by COVID, but I'm really looking forward to being back this summer. In the past, what I taught was a comparative U.S.-China environmental law class. The U.S. and China are the two countries that have the largest impact on the planet's environment. And what we would do after the class is then go to China. We would visit 3 cities, Beijing, Shanghai, and one other city, and meet with Chinese environmental experts, NGOs, and the like. That's no longer possible because the COVID restrictions in China are such that it's going to be virtually impossible to China this year. But I'm really excited because as a result, we've really restructured the course, and it's now environmental governance in the developing world with a special focus on Asia and Oceania. And one of the reasons I'm particularly excited about that is that I have a long relationship with working on and visiting countries in the developing world. Way back in, as soon as I graduated from college in the 1970s, I ended up sailing across the South Pacific at a time when a lot of those island nations didn't even have airports, and I was able to have a rare opportunity to visit them. They're now facing the problem of climate change and sea level rise. That's not anything that they've really made the least bit of a contribution to, and yet they're the victim states that kind of depend on the world successfully dealing with that issue. For the course itself, there's the 8 classroom sessions. One really good benefit for the students is you're not going to have to purchase materials. What we're going to be using is a book that I'm one of the co-authors of. I don't know if you can see that it's Comparative and Global Environmental Law. There'll be excerpts from this that I have in digital form that I'll be giving to the students to read. We'll look at actual controversies and cases that arose in developing countries and how their system of law has tried to deal with it. Among the issues we're going to be exploring are sort of fundamental questions of environmental justice. They often refer to it as the North-South split in environmental law and in global negotiations, that developing countries maintain that they have been the victims of the irresponsible way in which developed countries developed without initially paying much heed to the need to control their emissions and creating massive problems like climate change. And yet they're now being asked to adapt to the consequences of that. The other book that I'm pleased to say we'll be using is Shooting Stars and Dancing Fish by Tony Aposa, a world-famous Philippine environmental activist who spent a fair amount of time at Vermont Law School. He was one of your summer scholars. This is a book that he's gifted to the world, and it has some really cool perspectives on how his journey in environmental law developed that led to him bringing the miners' Aposa case before the Philippine Supreme Court, where for the first time, the Supreme Court of the Philippines recognized the right of future generations to be represented now today in court as fundamental decisions are made about issues that are going to be affecting them in the future. Now, another thing I've developed over the years in teaching these courses is the way in which students are evaluated. There's not a final exam where you're just asked to who can do the best job of memorizing stuff we've covered in class. But what we'll be doing for every class is we'll have a question on the course website that you'll be asked to reflect on. And then what I found so successful in the past is that when the course ends, the students then basically just tie together the thoughts that they've already put together for each of the individual class sessions into a paper that kind of sums up their reflections on the status of environmental law in the developing world and how that can be improved for the future. So it's not like you have to have the stress of worrying about memorizing things or studying for the exam. It's more a matter of your thinking throughout the course and developing that in these daily postings that you then weave together into a paper at the end. Now, as far as the field trip goes, of course, nowadays we have to kind of play it by ear. It was easy in the past, and it would just say everyone will get a round-trip plane ticket to Beijing, and we'll take it from there once we arrive. It's going to have to be worked out a bit more in advance. But the good news is that those countries in Southeast Asia and Oceania are now reopening to tourists. So it will be possible to visit them. I'm looking at a number of options. One thing we want to be is sensitive to student budgets. Airfares are, it looks like, considerably higher to some places than they were in the past, but it's still possible to get some bargains. One piece of good news is that the cost of living in these countries is not very high, so it's not that hard to afford being able to have hotel rooms and the like. One country that's a leading candidate for where we may visit is actually Vietnam. Vietnam is a country that has an incredibly long, low-lying coastline, and they've been for decades suffering the impacts of rising sea level, saltwater intrusion into the Delta area that is affecting rice farming there, and yet they've contributed virtually no greenhouse gas emissions that are causing the problem of sea level rise. I have visited Vietnam and traveled the length of the country. I met with the head of their environmental protection agency and discussed some of the problems that they were having in enforcing their environmental laws. They are a communist country, but English is widely spoken, and we have very good relations now between the U.S. and Vietnam, and that's one possibility. There are some spectacular on these trips. We also like to go see whatever the top tourist sites are. When we did China, we would always go to the Great Wall. We'd visit the Forbidden City and the Temple of Heaven. In Vietnam, one of the most exciting things to visit is Ha Long Bay, which has these incredible karst formations that rise right out of the ocean, and you take these small boats and sail among them. So that's one possibility of what we could do. Another possibility is to visit an island nation such as Tuvalu, which is one of the least visited places on Earth, but it is possible to get there on scheduled airlines. And once you get there, it costs virtually nothing. Their whole island way of life that's existed forever is at risk of disappearing. In fact, some travel agents have said, if you ever want to visit it, you better visit it now, because the entire island may disappear. And to learn how they're trying to persuade the global community to be more proactive in responding to climate change and the way in which they're trying to adapt. Now, of course, environmental issues are at the forefront of that island. There are also other places like the Marshall Islands, where the U.S. did atmospheric nuclear testing back in the 1960s that required the entire population of the islands essentially to be relocated, because we tested the original hydrogen bomb there, and it's caused so much environmental devastation that exists to this day. So that's a really stark example of a way in which environmental justice issues have been raised. It's a U.S. Possession now still, but is something that for the foreseeable future, we're going to be dealing with substantial environmental justice problems there, as well as the problem of rising sea levels, virtually wiping out in the future the way of life of those islands. So the message I want to send is, I'm certainly going to be open to your feedback, those who enroll in the course, as to what your preferences are for the field trip. But there are lots of opportunities. The Philippines is another possible. Tony Aposa has a school of the sea there. My understanding is late July is one of the weather-wise is not the greatest time to be there, but we really are going to try to tailor this to the interests of students, keep it as economical as we possibly can, and build in as many experiences that you'll remember for a lifetime while learning more about how the developing world is, how environmental law is evolving there, and our responsibility of citizens of the developed world to be aware of and concerned about ways in which to help those countries. So why don't I open it up to questions now?
Thank you. And for the folks who are here, I see Noah, I see Adam. You're welcome to raise your hand, or if you want to just put a question in the chat, that's fine too. And while you're thinking of that, I need to interject on a personal note that I was here when Tony Aposa came one summer. It was probably about 10 years ago at this point, but what an unbelievable impression that he left on everybody he came into contact here. I mean, the vibrancy of this man was absolutely unparalleled. So I'm personally very excited that you're going to use his book for part of the class too. I think that's fantastic. All right, Adam, it's you.
Hi. Sorry I don't have my camera on. I was actually eating a really, really late lunch. And thank you, Professor, for talking to us today. I went to UMD undergrad.
Oh, great.
I had Joanna Goger as my teacher, and I used your textbook. And so
fantastic. I'm giving a guest lecture in her class on Thursday.
Oh, that's awesome. You weren't there for me. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so I was really excited when I heard that you were kind of a teacher here. So I'm really excited, and I'm even now more excited just for the class itself. I was excited to take a course with you, but now I'm excited for the class. Um, I I'm just firstly, I'm just wondering how long is this trip? Because I saw that it was like on our brochure that it was just 1 credit, and then I figured that it was just a like kind of like a weekend intensive thing. But this doesn't seem like just a weekend.
Well, no, it takes quite a while to get to Asia. In the past, we set aside 11 days for the trip. And my guess would be, I mean, it would depend in part upon the airline schedules. If we're going to one of these islands, sometimes the flights are only 3 times a week or the like. So we'll have to adjust it. But my guess would be plan on 7 to 10 or 11 days.
Got you. And I mean, I'm assuming that this fits in, like it won't extend into my fall semester. It's actually
Right.
like
Right.
very cool. I also just want to say when you said Tuvalu or Tuvalu, yeah, I'm aware of this island. Some of my these YouTubers who kind of base their YouTube channel around seeking discomfort, and kind of getting out of your comfort zone. It's a really like uplifting YouTube channel. And on one of these videos, they went to Tuvalu, and it was just so cool to see just like this community, and you could see both sides. I mean, it's cool to see that you have both sides of the ocean right there, but it's also sad because of all this. So I'm doing a little shameless plug for Tuvalu and the Philippines.
Right.
This summer I worked with the Department of State with the Bureau of OES, and I was researching environmental defender killings in the Philippines. And so that I think that would also be cool to actually go there and see what's going on. So just since there's only a few of us in here, I figured I might as well share my thoughts. Thank you again.
Yeah, in 2017, the IUCN Academy of Environmental Law colloquium was hosted by universities in the Philippines. They had it in Cebu, which is not an island not far from where Manila is. And we had a memorial service for Tony Aposa's top lieutenant who had been murdered several years ago. So that I'm glad to see that that's an issue that you're aware of and concerned about, because it's certainly important throughout the world.
Absolutely. I mean, other than that, it's going to be probably just more logistics as it gets closer, but I'm extremely excited for this class and probably this field trip that I'll be attending as well.
Well, let me speak for just a moment about some of the logistics that come to my mind, and then I'll ask and see if perhaps Claire has anything on her end. But keeping in mind, folks, that it's been, I guess this will be, this is the 3rd year that we have not been able to have a trip because of the pandemic. So I'm going on like this cognitive overload memory, so bear with me. But what I recall is that probably at some point at the very start of the summer, if not earlier, Professor Percival will share with the class, like, this is the itinerary for the trip in as much that you need to plan to get yourself to this airport by this date. So then it's up to students to book your airfare. We are not setting up flights for you. You folks have to do that for yourselves. I strongly encourage, I mean, we can't require it, but if I could, I would require that you get some type of travel insurance so that in the event the trip is canceled because of ongoing pandemic issues or what have you, you will get your refund. But that is your responsibility. So let me be clear about that. So please do that.
I would also like to add that the travel insurance is very important, especially in a time of COVID testing, because a lot of airports are requiring a lot of they're requiring that you get a COVID test before even going in the country, before going in the airport, before taking off. It varies from airport and depending on where we fly out of, but like with the Cuba trip, they had to get a test before even going into Canada, and then they had to get another test from Canada to get into Cuba. And if you got a positive COVID test, then there goes your entire trip, and so you would have lost your flight. So travel insurance is a big yay.
Yes, please do that. And at that point, the other information that you'll receive will be things like, if you do need to purchase an additional ticket for this type of transportation, or if you need to be sure to book a hotel at this hotel on this date, like that information will be given to you, but then you do need to be responsible for making certain arrangements, and all of that will be conveyed to you. So you will know what you need to get, where and how, so that will be shared with the class. I know that folks always ask, well, is there money for this class? And yes, there certainly is. That's all handled through financial aid. I can't tell you off the top of my head what that exact amount is. That might be based in part on the itinerary that's eventually developed and the expected costs. But my sense from students is that in the past, when we've had these types of trips, that financial aid is available such that it covers these costs. So you shouldn't have to worry about coming up with any kind of out-of-pocket costs in that sense for the trip as well. This class, like I said, is term 4. That's the very last week of July this summer is where it falls. So that would be the week of July 5th. The second week of class is the week of August 1st, which means that your trip will be the week of August 8th as far as planning goes there. Claire, is there anything you can add maybe as far as visas by chance? Is that something that your office has handled in the past?
So it varies from country to country, the different visa requirements, but if they're going to Vietnam, Bob, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but oftentimes you can get the visa for Vietnam when you get to the airport in the country. That's true, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. I remember.
You cut out a bit there, Bob.
Oh.
Because we have such good relations with Vietnam now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think so. It's good to also make sure that I think we'll know a bit closer to, like the exact cost too for the visas, but each visa also costs money. So it's not cheap. It's probably a bit cheaper than China, though. China visas are a pain in the butt and they're a bit pricey. And they can tend to be picky, so that's one positive to not going to China this time around, as well as, as what Bob was saying, that it's really hard to get into China this time around. So, but, one thing I want to make sure to point out, and I guess it might not be very important now, but I believe it's going to be rainy season, isn't it, that time of year? So make sure you pack a good pair of rainy clothes, because that's usually this time of year you'll get really wet.
The Philippines gets more rain in July than any other time. The monsoon season doesn't formally start until October, but we will definitely be cognizant about what weather to expect.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Another thing adding on to what Courtney said is make sure you keep all of your receipts. So if you get any kind of receipt, keep it in case there is an off chance that you could get reimbursed by the financial aid office or some other program. So it's definitely to hold on to every single receipt that you get. Mm-hmm. Although a lot of the places in the developing world do not have receipts, so it's a bit hit or miss. But if you get it, keep it.
I have another question.
Sure.
Just thought of it. Professor, how many students usually come along on this trip?
Well, it kind of depends on how many are in the course. I would say in the past, most of the students in the course came. The trips to China range, typically it was about 5 to 7 people that actually went on the trip.
Cool.
And that was kind of the perfect size because it made transportation, somewhat easy.
Right, I can imagine.
Any other questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, excitement?
Yeah, my comment was that I'm excited.
Right on. Tell your friends. Let's get a group going.
If I may, I would just like to say, first of all, thank you for taking the time, of course, to host this and give us this information. I've been looking at this for a while now, and and as Adam said, I'm even more excited now that I know even more information. You actually answered all of the questions right before I was going to ask them every single time. So thank you for that. But I did just want to say, like, if we were focusing on Vietnam, for example, I know that you mentioned the coast. Would we focus anything on any other issues within Vietnam? I've had some experience with the country, not actually having been there, but doing independent research in college on environmental issues in Vietnam, and I was just curious, kind of like how in depth we might go in those areas. That being said, I would be fine with going anywhere because all of the options sounded wonderful. I just happen to have more experience with Vietnam.
Well, that's wonderful that you have that background. That will make you very well prepared for the course. We can, really, flexibility is one of the keys. I want to make this trip as responsive to your concerns as possible. In my visit to Vietnam and spending an entire afternoon with the head of their Environmental Protection Agency, I learned about a lot of issues that I wasn't aware of before. They were having huge problems with criminal enforcement of the environmental law because they were dealing with this legal interpretation that said they couldn't impose criminal sanctions unless they could prove sort of harm that rose to the level of tort. And that was causing them great concerns because they couldn't enforce reporting violations because they couldn't prove what was the consequence of not reporting correctly, how much pollution you were emitting, or the like. And so, and I also had dinner with one of the top members of their parliament, who was very concerned that they weren't sufficiently concerned at the time. This was back in 2008 when I was living in China on sabbatical, that it was hard to get the parliament to worry about climate change, even though it was already affecting the country so dramatically. So to the extent there are specific issues you'd like us to explore, I'm certainly open to figuring out the best way to do that while we're in country.
Sure. I don't necessarily have anything for you right now, but provided that I get into the class, for example, then maybe we can have that conversation then. But thank you again.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is that most of the trip planning will be done sort of at the beginning of the summer when we know how many students are interested in coming, and we can make sure we can make it as responsive as possible to the student interest and budget, so that we will have it all scoped out, within 2 months before where we're going to go and what we're planning to do.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, great. I am going to stop recording. I want to thank you again, Professor Percival.